The moment my husband's taxi disappeared around the corner, heading to the airport for a month-long trip abroad, a wave of unexpected loneliness washed over me. We had our routines, our small arguments over dishes left in the sink or who forgot to buy milk again, but underneath it all, our marriage was solid. Or so I thought. 2 weeks into his absence, the silence of our apartment became overwhelming. I missed the mundane conversations, the presence of another human being. My work, usually a welcome distraction, offered little solace. Then came the work conference, a blur of presentations and networking sessions, until I met Alex. Alex, with his easy smile and a keen interest in my project, didn't initially strike me as anything but another colleague. But as we bumped into each other over coffee breaks and panel discussions, his interest became more pronounced, more personal. I reminded myself I was married. I mentioned my husband in conversations, a shield against whatever was brewing. Yet, the loneliness clung to me, a constant shadow. On the last night of the conference, after a casual group dinner, Alex asked me to join him for a drink. Just as friends, he said. My initial resistance faltered. Just one drink, I reasoned, ignoring the voice in my head that screamed caution. That one drink turned into several, and the conversation flowed from professional to personal, blurring the lines I had drawn firmly in my mind. The loneliness I'd been feeling seemed to recede in his company, replaced by a dangerous sense of comfort. When he leaned in, I didn't pull back. The reminder of my husband, of my marriage, was there, but it was like a whisper drowned out by a louder voice that urged me to forget, to succumb to the momentary escape Alex offered. The guilt hit me the next morning like a physical blow. I woke up alone, thankfully, in my hotel room, but the weight of what I had almost let happen, what I had wanted to happen, pressed down on me. I couldn't bring myself to face Alex again, avoiding him for the remainder of the conference, each glance in his direction a sharp stab of shame. I told myself it was a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. I was married, happily so, and this was just a slip, a mistake that wouldn't repeat. But as I packed my bags to return home, the reality of my loneliness, of the distance I felt not just from my husband but from the person I thought I was, settled in. The affair with Alex hadn't started that night, but the seeds were planted, growing in the soil of my loneliness and dissatisfaction. Returning home, I expected relief, to fall back into the rhythm of my marriage and forget Alex and the temptation he represented. But the apartment felt just as empty as before, and my husband's voice over the phone seemed to come from a great distance, both physical and emotional. The stability of our marriage, once my rock, now felt like a thin veneer covering a chasm of unspoken feelings and unmet needs. The guilt of that night, of my willingness to betray my husband, followed me, a constant reminder of a choice I had made. It was a choice I couldn't undo, a moment of weakness that had revealed a truth about myself I couldn't ignore. The stability of my marriage, the life I had built, suddenly seemed fragile, built on a foundation of routine and complacency rather than connection and love. As the days passed, the thought of Alex lingered, a temptation that called to me in moments of weakness. And eventually, despite all my guilt and all my resolutions, I found myself reaching out, succumbing to the temptation I had sworn to resist. The moment my husband walked through the door, returning from his month-long trip, my heart sank into a complicated mix of relief and dread. The facade of normalcy I had meticulously planned crumbled under his familiar gaze, a gaze now tinged with an unfamiliar edge of suspicion. "Hey," I greeted him, my voice a shade too bright, as I took his coat and tried to lean in for a welcome-back kiss. He reciprocated, but the warmth I had hoped to find was missing, replaced by a cautious distance. "How was the trip?" I asked, steering him towards the living room, desperate to fill the silence with mundane chatter about his flight, the weather there, anything to avoid the tension simmering beneath the surface. "It was good, productive," he replied, but his eyes scanned the room, then me, as if looking for something out of place, something that would explain the dissonance he sensed. Despite my efforts to act as if everything was normal, to slip back into the comfortable routine of our life before his trip, the guilt of my affair with Alex was a constant shadow. I found myself overcompensating, laughing too loud at jokes that weren't funny, cooking elaborate dinners, and initiating conversations about topics I had little interest in. Alex, unaware or perhaps uncaring of the turmoil he had caused, continued to send messages, each one a sharp reminder of the duplicity of my actions. "I can't do this anymore," I typed one night, my heart pounding as I hit send. I told Alex we had to end things, that I needed to focus on my marriage, on repairing whatever cracks had appeared during my husband's absence. But the more I tried to distance myself from Alex, the more acute my husband's suspicion became. He noticed the small changes, the way I jumped at sudden noises, the way my phone was always face down on the table, the late nights spent working, when in reality, I was agonizing over messages from Alex that I dared not answer. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the weight of his gaze was too much to bear. "Is everything okay with us?" he asked, his voice steady but laden with unspoken concern. "Of course," I replied too quickly, forcing a smile. "Why wouldn't it be?" He shrugged, a non-committal gesture that did nothing to ease the tension. "You've just seemed distant lately." "I'm just tired, that's all," I lied, avoiding his eyes. "Work's been crazy." We continued the meal in a strained silence, the unsaid words between us growing heavier with each passing moment. I knew then that the facade of normalcy I had tried to maintain was cracking, that my attempts to deny the changes in my behavior were futile. The guilt of my actions, of the secret I was keeping from the man I had vowed to share everything with, was eating away at the foundation of our marriage, and no amount of denial could hide that truth forever. As the days passed, my husband's suspicion only deepened, his casual inquiries becoming more pointed, more probing. And with each denial, "everything's fine," I could feel the gap between us widening, the trust that had once been the cornerstone of our relationship eroding under the weight of my lies. The sharp beep of an incoming message shattered the silence of our kitchen. I glanced at my phone, carelessly left on the counter, as I reached for my coffee. My husband, Mark, already up and scrolling through his emails, paused and glanced at the screen. The look on his face shifted from casual interest to confusion, then to something colder. I knew before I saw the sender's name that it was Alex. Mark picked up the phone, his fingers hesitating before he swiped to unlock it. I had forgotten to delete the latest string of messages from Alex, messages that were more than friendly, laced with a familiarity no mere friend would have. "Who's Alex?" Mark's voice was calm, too calm. The room felt suddenly too tight, the air too thick. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud against the quiet of the morning. "Just a friend from the conference," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. The lie tasted bitter. He handed me the phone, one message open and glaringly obvious in its intimacy. "Doesn't look like just a friend" messages to me. I felt the world tilt, a sense of vertigo as I stared at the words that betrayed me. There was no way out, no excuse that could cover the truth. "Mark, the words choked in my throat. He waited, the silence stretching between us, heavy with expectation and dread. I confessed. The words tumbled out, messy and raw. "It was a mistake. I'm so sorry." The plea for forgiveness sounded hollow even to my ears. Mark didn't yell or accuse. He stood there, the silence now filled with his palpable anger and disbelief. Then, without a word, he walked out. The door closing behind him echoed like a final verdict. He was gone for 2 days. 2 long, agonizing days during which I called, texted, left voicemails, all unanswered. Each attempt to reach out left me feeling more desperate, more alone. I realized then that half-truths wouldn't fix this. I decided to confess everything, the full extent of my betrayal, in hopes of finding a way to save our marriage. It was a faint hope, but it was all I had left. The weight of what I was about to do sat heavy on my chest, a constant companion as I waited for Mark to come back. When he finally walked through the door, the look on his face was unreadable. I braced myself, ready to lay bare all my mistakes, to show him my willingness to fight for us. Whether it would be enough, I couldn't say. But it was a start, a step towards mending what I had broken, or at least, trying to. The frost on the windows glistened as the last light of Christmas Eve faded, a serene backdrop to the turmoil brewing inside me. I had rehearsed my confession 100 times, but now, as I heard his key turn in the lock, every rehearsed word evaporated. He stepped into the warmth of our living room, his eyes searching mine, sensing the gravity of the moment. "We need to talk," I began, my voice barely a whisper, but enough to pierce the festive silence. As he sat, I noticed the weariness in his eyes, a testament to the distance that had grown between us. "I have something to confess," I continued, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. The details of my affair with Alex spilled out, unbidden and raw, leaving nothing in the shadows. My voice trembled as I laid bare the betrayal, the guilt, and the pain it had caused. I watched his face for any sign of reaction, but he was a mask of stoicism, absorbing each word with a silence that was louder than any outcry. When I finished, my plea for forgiveness hung in the air, desperate and fraught with hope. "This will never happen again," I promised, a vow that felt both monumental and fragile. He sat motionless, the weight of my confession settling around us like a thick fog. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm yet distant. "I need time to think about this," he said, standing to leave the room. The finality in his stride felt like a chasm opening between us, one that words could no longer bridge. Christmas Day dawned with an oppressive silence. The festive decorations mocked us with their cheer, a stark contrast to the unspoken tension that wrapped around us like chains. We moved through the day like ghosts, our interactions minimal, the air charged with the unsaid and the undone. The day after, as the morning light struggled through the clouds, he found me in the kitchen, the remnants of our silent Christmas laid bare on the table between us. "I've thought about what you said," he began, his voice steady but laden with an undercurrent of sadness. "We need to decide where we go from here." The urgency of the moment, the gravity of his words, anchored me to the spot. This was it. The precipice of our future, a junction where every choice led down a path from which there was no returning. The confession, the plea, and now the decision, all converged in this moment, defining the course of our lives with the weight of their truth. As he waited for my response, the realization dawned on me that this was not just about seeking forgiveness but about confronting the depth of the damage done. It was a reckoning, a moment to face the consequences of my actions and to decide whether the foundation we had built our marriage on was strong enough to withstand the storm I had brought upon us. The morning air was still when I heard the doorbell ring, an unusual sound that echoed through the silence of our home. My husband, who had been distant and cold since my confession on Christmas Eve, answered the door. I watched from the staircase, my heart sinking as I recognized the visitor. A lawyer, briefcase in hand, exuding an air of formality that seemed out of place in our once warm and loving home. I lingered at the top of the stairs, straining to catch snippets of their conversation, a pit forming in my stomach as the word divorce cut through the air like a knife. The reality of the situation hit me with brute force. My husband, the man I had shared my life with, was considering a future without me. After the lawyer left, the house fell into an oppressive silence, heavier than before. My husband's demeanor towards me changed. Where there was once warmth, now only an icy detachment remained. His glances were fleeting, filled with a mixture of hurt and resolve that I couldn't bear to face. I approached him, desperation coloring my voice as I pleaded, "Please, can we talk about this? Isn't there a way to work through it?" But his response was firm, his decision unyielding. "Trust is broken beyond repair," he said, his voice devoid of the affection that once defined us. The finality in his tone left no room for negotiation, no glimmer of hope for reconciliation. Days later, the divorce papers arrived, their presence in our home a tangible symbol of our fractured marriage. Holding them in my hands, the weight of my decisions, my betrayal, felt heavier than ever. I looked up to find him watching me, his face an unreadable mask. "You need to sign these," he said, his voice steady, betraying no emotion. I was shocked, still holding onto a sliver of hope that we could salvage our relationship. But as I met his gaze, I realized the depth of the hurt I had caused. This wasn't a decision made in haste. It was a resolution born from pain and a need to heal, to move forward from the betrayal that had eroded the foundation of our marriage. In that moment, I understood the irreversible impact of my actions. The man standing before me, once my partner in every sense of the word, had become a stranger, distanced by hurt and a broken trust that no apology could mend. The divorce papers in my hands were not just a formality. They were a stark reminder of the consequences of my choices, a final chapter in the story of us that I had never envisioned. As I signed my name, each stroke of the pen felt like closing the door on the life we had built together. The finality of it was overwhelming, a mix of regret, sadness, and acceptance washing over me. Our marriage, once filled with love and promise, was ending, and with it, the future we had imagined together. The sun was barely up, casting a cold, indifferent light through the windows of what used to be our shared bedroom, now just a stark reminder of everything that had unraveled. The request was simple, almost painfully so. "Please sign the divorce papers by the end of the week." His voice was devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with, replaced by a formality that widened the chasm between us. I spent the morning in a haze, dialing the number of a recommended lawyer with shaky fingers, hoping against hope for a loophole, a lifeline, anything that could rewind the clock or at least pause the impending finality. The lawyer's office was sterile and impersonal, a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions within me. Given the circumstances, reconciliation seems unlikely, the lawyer stated, her voice echoing the finality I dreaded. It wasn't just advice, it was a confirmation of the inevitable. Returning home, the divorce papers lay on the kitchen counter, an unassuming stack of documents that held the power to dismantle the life I knew. Signing them felt like an act of betrayal, not just to my husband but to myself, to the vows we had taken. Each signature was a heavy stroke, sealing the end of a chapter I wasn't ready to close. Packing was a solitary affair, each item a memory, each memory a sharp sting. The process was mechanical, a physical manifestation of the internal process of letting go. Our final conversation was a dance of avoidance and confrontation, a delicate balance between expressing hurt and not wanting to inflict more. I never wanted it to end like this, he said, the disappointment heavy in his voice. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a deep, resounding hurt that was harder to face. The move to the new apartment was a blur, a series of motions that felt both liberating and terrifying. The space was mine alone, a canvas blank and ready for a new start, yet the emptiness echoed my own feelings of loss and isolation. Starting over wasn't just about a new address, it was about facing myself, the choices I had made, and the consequences that followed. As I unpacked, the realization settled in with a quiet intensity. This wasn't just a new apartment, it was a step towards a future I hadn't planned for, a path I had to navigate alone. The finality of the divorce, once a looming threat, was now my reality, a testament to the choices that led me here. In the solitude of my new beginning, I was left to ponder the journey ahead, the lessons learned, and the person I hoped to become. The stamp on the document echoed through the courthouse hallway, a final, definitive sound marking the end of my marriage. It was done. The divorce was finalized. Walking out into the blinding light of day, the reality of my new status as a divorced woman hit me with unexpected force. There was no turning back, no more what ifs or if onlys. This was my new reality, shaped by choices I had made. In the weeks that followed, I found myself grappling with the weight of those choices, acknowledging the hurt I had caused without sinking into a mire of self-pity or regret. It was a delicate balance, accepting responsibility while also forgiving myself enough to move forward. The opportunity to start anew came in the form of a job offer in a different city. It promised not just a change of scenery but a chance to rebuild myself, to step out of the shadow of my past actions and the fallout from the divorce. Accepting the job felt like the first step toward reclaiming a sense of self, a declaration that I was not defined by my mistakes. But starting over wasn't without its challenges. Alex, the man who had been a catalyst for so much change, had become a ghost. Attempts to reach out, to find closure or at least some understanding, were met with silence. His disappearance from my life served as a stark reminder of the transient nature of the affair and its impact on my life. Isolation followed me like a shadow in those early days. Friends who had once been mutual with my ex-husband seemed to disappear, choosing sides in a battle I never wanted to fight. Family tiptoed around the subject of the divorce, a well-meaning but isolating attempt to spare my feelings. It was in this solitude that I was forced to confront the consequences of my actions, not just the end of my marriage but the ripple effect it had on every aspect of my life. Yet, within this isolation, there was also growth. I threw myself into my work, seeking not just distraction but excellence. Personal development and professional achievements became my focus, a way to rebuild my sense of worth and identity. The satisfaction of meeting a challenge, of exceeding expectations, became a balm for the emotional wounds left by the divorce and the affair. The realization of the full extent of the consequences of my actions was a gradual process, one that came with its share of pain and acceptance. It was a journey through the darker parts of myself, a confrontation with the choices I had made and their impact on the people I loved. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I found myself at the threshold of a new beginning. The divorce, while an end, was also a starting point, a chance to learn from the past and move forward with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I valued. I embraced the possibility of a future shaped not by past mistakes but by the lessons learned from them. This new beginning was not about erasing the past but about integrating it into the fabric of my life, a tapestry of experiences that had shaped me into the person I was becoming. It was a recognition that while the past could not be changed, the future was still mine,